Hello and welcome to the Institute of Advanced Studies. I'm Ksenia Chmutina, the director of the IAS. And today, as pretty much every week in the past 2 weeks, we have yet another exciting discussion, conversation, presentation, and we are absolutely delighted to host Dr. Helena Cooper Thomas. Just before we start, I just want to remind you yet again that the IAS is the space and place at Loughborough University where we hold exciting, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, free conversations about things that really matter. And I'm sure today will be one of those conversations. A couple of housekeeping rules. So this seminar is hybrid. We are recording the lecture, which will be released on our YouTube channel and as a video and also as a podcast. There will be a Q&A session after the presentation, but we will not be recording questions and answers. If you do have questions, please post them online, and Kieran is monitoring that, so we will be able to pass them to Helena. Without any further ado, I'd like to ask Professor Joe Sylvester to introduce our fellow today. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. Well, welcome, and thank you for being here, and welcome to everybody online as well. I have great pleasure in introducing Professor Helena Cooper Thomas, who I have known for quite a long time now, who is also a friend and colleague, but also a friend and colleague to quite a few people in Loughborough as well. So thank you for being here, all of those of you as well. But so just to say a little bit about Helena, because she's obviously the star of today. So I would like to point out that Helena is a professor of organisational psychology at Auckland University of Technology in New Zealand. She was also recently voted onto the prestigious Academy of Management Organisational Behaviour Division as executive at large, with responsibilities for organising activities for more than 6,000 members across the world. So your reach is incredible. And she's also, which is more relevant to today, she's known for her research on socialisation, so organisational socialisation. And that's basically how companies, businesses, organisations onboard new employees. So she's worked with quite a few different organisations, as diverse as Shell, right through to the military. But today she's going to talk about one of her most interesting groups of newcomers, and that is new MPs entering Parliament. Now, it wasn't planned, but this is actually quite timely, given that we've got a general election coming up. So I'd like you to think ahead, not to the 4th of July, which is the general election, but to the 5th of July, which is the first day that all of the new MPs, and there's likely to be in excess of 200 new MPs, will enter Parliament for the first time and take on their role. And I'd also like to point out that those new MPs are not formally trained, they don't have a job description, they're probably their most difficult challenge on the first day is finding in their office. So Helena is going to give us a fantastic and very, very unusual glimpse into the world of new MPs and their experiences. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the lovely introduction.
Pleasure.
All right, so, and I would point out this is research that I've done with Joe and also James Greenslade Yates, who's a colleague at AUT. So, first of all, thank you so much to the IAS for hosting this. It's amazing, such a supportive crew, so organised. It's been marvellous. Don't tell anyone. Oh, shouldn't be saying that. Okay, but thank you very much to all of you for supporting my visit in so many ways. It's been really wonderful. And thank you, just that this is a thing that exists to have these conversations. It's great. I also want to thank all of you in the room and online, because your time is precious and you're giving some of it to listen to me talk about this research, and I really appreciate that, so thank you. Hopefully, I repay it with some interesting bits and pieces that you can take away and think about further. All right, so why did I get interested in newcomers? It's from my own experience of being new and feeling a little bit out of place. So when I did my master's, I went to Canada. I'm originally from the UK, but I went to Canada and I went to the Canadian prairies, and it was very cold. And this is not a picture of me in the middle, but this is kind of what I looked like when I walked to university in the winter. -30 was the average winter temperature. -65 was the coldest I ever walked into work. And so it was a very different experience. It felt very unusual. And culturally, it was very different. So this is a picture of people line dancing. It was just a phenomenally different experience. And so I felt very out of place and very new. And that got me very interested in how do people adjust when they're new and the choices they make and the strategies they perhaps use to cope with that. So a lot of my research has been actually, so today I'm presenting some qualitative research. A lot of my research has been quantitative. And it's been about how newcomers understand and integrate into an organization. So they learn about their role, they learn their tasks, they maybe have a job description, as Joe was just briefly mentioning before, that politicians don't have. But that's very common for new employees. They also develop connections with colleagues, develop a sense of belonging, hopefully, maybe have a mentor and a buddy, those sorts of things that help them. And then they also learn about the organisation, the mission and values and history of the organisation. So they really began to feel a part of the place. And so that's been a more structured, collegial, helpful, high investment process helps new employees, and they're proactive, and that all helps them to have a better experience. But often that is not how socialization works. And I've got another project on Curry looking at about sort of more toxic collegial behaviors. But that's not to say, but so traditionally I've been the sort of like happy version of the newcomer experience. And I seem to be getting dark as I get older and heading towards a less happy version of events. So today I'm going to talk about sort of a more negative workplace experience for newcomers. Although I would say there were glimpses of positive. There were people who did mention collegiality and so on. So I'm not talking about those today. Those didn't make it into the model that we've come up with. But there were glimpses of that in the data. It's not uniformly negative, but there are strong themes around that. So, okay, so this is the New Zealand Parliament, which is where we did our research. It's just a photo I took on my phone about a decade ago. And so the round building is the Beehive, is the colloquial name. That's got the debating chamber in it, which is usually called the House. And then parliamentary buildings over to the right, and a lot of other offices here in Bowen House. So that's where all of this happens. So I'm going to talk about the new New Zealand politicians. We were looking at those who were new to Parliament. They'd come in the 2011 election. And so I was interviewing them in about 2013. And so an interesting, so these are the political parties who were in power at the time, or in Parliament at the time. So we have a coalition, or we have the potential for coalitions. We have a proportional representation system in New Zealand, modelled on Germany's system, apparently. So when politicians are new, they have two things that they're trying to do. One is they're trying to represent their political party well. They're trying to make sure that the party looks good, because them being in Parliament is dependent on how their party does. And even if they didn't win their electorate seat, they can still get in proportionately on the list as a list MP. So it's very important always that their party does well. It increases their chances of getting into Parliament and staying in Parliament. But at the same time, they're also competing with their colleagues to try and get more advanced roles. They're trying to compete to be on foreign trade delegations that interest them, to go and meet people overseas that they want to influence or get a connection with. They're trying to get on select committees that are more prestigious or that align better with their interests. They're maybe even trying to be like an assistant minister when they're new. I mean, obviously they want to get further up the hierarchy. Maybe even they want to be prime minister. But so there's the element of cooperation that they want the party to do well, but they're also competing with their colleagues in a very, well, ultimately it's quite transparent, because who gets to be the chair of a committee or go on an overseas delegation? It's quite clear that that person got preferred, right? So there's this interesting tension the whole time. So when we're looking at this data, we went in originally just to say, like, this is really interesting. Let's look at new MPs. Let's look at the process. This is something that hasn't been looked at before. But when we were looking at the data, we realised it had a link to some research that John van Maanen had done a long time ago, right? So some of his papers from 1973, 75. But in this 78 paper, he mentions tournament socialisation. And we thought that what we were looking at was quite similar to this. So he had done research in different organisations, but a lot of his research was with the police. He doesn't mention which police force. But he talks about this tournament socialisation tactic that differentiates people on presumed differences in skills and abilities. So it's not objective in any way. It's just seeing what, who looks better. And those who look better get opportunities for training or other advancement, and those who don't get sidelined. They get into roles that don't take them anywhere, that aren't prestigious, that aren't wanted. And he said that this tournament socialization process happens in large organizations, happens at senior levels. And what it does is these newcomers who have this very adversarial experience are obsequious to authority and feel insecure. So you can see that this would make people very cautious, and sort of they're possibly seeking patronage. They're sort of the equivalent of sort of doffing their cap to authority all the time. Oh, how marvelous, yes, sir, great, loved your speech. You can see how those kind of behaviors could happen in a parliamentary context, or a political context. And there are other tournaments, work-life tournaments that go on. There's other research on that. So for people to get training opportunities, assignment or promotion. And there's a nice chapter by Helena Cooper and colleagues from 1993 about a range of settings where tournaments occur, including professional service firms, academia, and even crime cartels, which I quite like. So these are not, it's not just, it's quite widespread that tournaments occur in organizations. And so we came up with this research question to help us frame up how to look at the data and analyze the data. So we asked how newcomers experience and respond to tournament socialization. So the focus of what does tournament socialization look like? If this, back in 1978, Van Maanen sort of said what it's done, but he hasn't really said what it is. So what's it really made up of? And then what does it really make newcomers do? He said they're obsequious. They're sort of sounds like they're kind of obedient. They're very concerned about more senior people and how they're going to be looked on. So, but what are newcomers actually doing to respond to this? So we had 23 new MPs across political parties, both in opposition and in government. And we interviewed them at about 2 years, hoping that at that stage, they would still remember what it was like to be new, but they weren't in that initial, like, I can't talk to anybody because I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't want to tell anybody that I don't want to know what I'm doing, that they'd feel comfortable enough to be interviewed. So it's trying to find the balance of when that was going to be the right time. So we figured 2 years. Oh, and the other thing is that we thought it was likely, and it proved to be true, that they would talk to each other. And if they'd had a good interview experience, they would say, yeah, that was fine. I talked to that researcher. She was fine. Yeah, it was quite interesting. So like trying to make that a positive experience so they would say that the other people would still be willing to see me. So transcribed it, use pseudonyms, be careful we were careful to de-identify the data, and then use mathematical analysis to look at the data. And I'm going to take you through 3 main areas of the findings. One is the socialization challenges, which what are those features of the tournament socialization that people experienced? Secondly, what did that do to newcomers? And our finding was that they felt very vulnerable. And thirdly, then, how did they respond to that, which is around using 2 types of strategy, which we call protect strategies and promote strategies. Don't be overwhelmed. My idea is just to show you this is the overall model. I'm not going to show you all of it, but this is where we got to. But what I will show you is, so has this got a pointer? Yes, maybe?
It might.
Yeah.
On that screen very well.
Okay, I'll just describe it then better. So in the outside circle, ellipsis, whatever we have, oval, in the bold, you'll see these are the overarching themes. And then within each of those, you've got the actual themes themselves. So peer competition, within party rivalries, political maneuvering, and so on. So the socialization challenges are around the outside edge. Then in the middle, you've got the newcomer who's feeling vulnerable. Their reputation is at stake. All these challenges are coming at them. How are they going to manage that? And then pushing out from that, sort of protecting them and trying to help them get ahead in this tournament context are the strategies they're using. So that's the sort of overall what's going on in the model. And so first of all, I'm going to talk to you about a few of those bits of the outside edge of the model about the challenges. So first, I'm going to talk about scrutiny, which has these 3 themes of public gaze, media spotlight, and peer monitoring, and then just witnessing casualties, because that's quite a fun one, quite unique, I think. Yay! So under scrutiny, the media spotlight one was about this idea that the whole time the media are always looking at what you're doing. You've never got a moment where, like, especially for women, what you wear seems to always be fair game. But anything that you do at all, the media, like, they're always looking for news. So that's what's the whole time you've got to be careful. So this so all these are all pseudonyms, but this MP Elizabeth says, this term, like this parliamentary term, a member from a certain party was basically hounded out. And you know, it's pretty vicious to watch when you see it happening. It was a media frenzy around it. So it's a real risk. The media are also sometimes what you want. People seek media attention. It's sort of a sort of a performance indicator. But there's this huge risk with the media that you do something wrong and they're like, oh yeah, I can get rid of that MP. Let's make a big scandal out of that one. So there's this real pressure for them about of that relationship with the media and how to cope with that. A second one is public gaze. So you'll never, whenever you go out, wherever you go to a dental appointment, you go to try on a new shirt somewhere, you're always being looked at. The public are always there looking at you. So Patricia's one here is a nice example. You're a member of Parliament at every moment of every day. I'm not Patricia even when I go to the supermarket now. Do you know what I mean? My mum had said that to me the day I got selected as a candidate. She said, you can't go out without a face on anymore, meaning you have to always wear makeup. You've always got to look. But the idea is you've always got to be ready that someone's just going to come up to you. I had another MP who was in the media every now and then for various things. And she said to me, when I'm in the media, I'll be out shopping with my kids and people will come up to me and they'll want to take photos with me and they'll want to shake my hand and they'll want to say, oh, I really love what you're doing. And they'll be like all this. But if I'm not in the media that's for a couple of weeks, then that all calms down again. So it must be quite sort of discombobulating to have that. Are people going to come and say hi to me, or are they going to come and even criticize me? Like, I don't like your policy. I thought your speech in Parliament last week was terrible. You know, like all of that you might get just when you step out your front door. So you can't just walk out the door. You've always got to think, what am I wearing? Where am I going? Am I going to be safe? Who am I going to talk to? It's a massive amount of pressure for these new politicians. And then another one was peer monitoring. So Daniel says you're being judged the whole time. It comes back to that you're always on. And it's not just your constituents, not just your team, it's not just the party, your colleagues are as well. So everything you do the whole time, other colleagues are saying, why are they doing that? Who are they speaking to? Why did they support that colleague on that bill? What was that about? So the whole time people are looking at what you're doing. This is the one I think is probably most common across other workplaces. Public gaze, I think, and media spotlight also probably really affect people at senior levels. So just trying to think about the generalizability of politicians to other work contexts, because we do think it has some generalizability. Okay, now witnessing casualties. So I'll give you this lovely quote from Charles, first of all. Not everyone survives. Zayn obviously didn't make it through. People do drop by the wayside from time to time. People make mistakes and get caught. Roger and Philip, Jim, at the end of the day, MPs are only human and it's a cutthroat business. Like they say, you make one little trip, people are pretty ready to jump on you and put the knife in. So this idea that, he even manages to list 4 other politicians who in recent times have had to leave Parliament because they've made mistakes that have been bad enough that have caused them to be pressured to resign. So it's a very high risk environment. If you do make a mistake, which is quite likely when you're new, that you don't know project protocols, you'll be asked, your party will ask you to resign. And at this time, so this is about a decade ago, but there were some, I just thought I'd give you some example mistakes of politicians. So one was a minister who wrote a reference for a friend and used letterhead to do that. And the reference, I think, was like for a job. And so obviously they were trying to help their friend get this job because they're like, they're friends with the minister. But anyway, so that minister had to resign. Another was a politician who went overseas and used her work credit card to pay for her partner to travel and accommodation stuff as well. So misuse of the work credit card. So she was sort of pressured to resign. I mean, I don't know. She resigned. I'm pretty sure it's pressure. but I wasn't, so it wasn't. And then another one was, and this got so much media attention. There was an MP who was drunk at a bar, not the people were around, and he asked the waiter to serve more alcohol, and the waiter refused, which is legally correct in New Zealand. You can't serve a drunk person. I don't know what the rules are here. But, and then he was like, I know the Prime Minister, he's gonna get you sacked, you know, and all this. Yeah. So that didn't go down well. So then that MP got forced to resign. So for newcomers, then that obviously makes them feel, well, obviously so the themes came through that they feel vulnerable. And so there were two themes within this. One is the hidden liabilities, that you don't know when you're going to make a mistake, you're going to do something wrong, like that sort of like that kind of ongoing risk. And the other one is about actually making mistakes and that they harmed people. In the case of the MPs I was interviewing, they were still in Parliament, so they hadn't made a mistake that ruined their career yet, or their parliamentary career, but they had made mistakes. So on the hidden liabilities one, this just before I read it to you, this was Edward, and he was talking about the fact that you come into Parliament and there's ongoing legislation. You've got no idea. You're on multiple select committees, and you're suddenly supposed to go through select committees and make intelligent comments about things that you've only just been given that select committee. You may know nothing about them. So he says you'll be thrown into the deep end of discussing issues that you may have had no experience, no knowledge, and no understanding. And all of a sudden, you're getting again the depth and breadth of a particular topic on a particular issue. And a good example of that, for instance, is of the two select committees that I'm a part of. All of a sudden, I'm the deputy chair. Then I've got to be thrown into actually understanding all of this. And like sometimes the chair would be away, and he'd have to chair a committee where he really didn't feel he had a great understanding of the content. So that's pretty frightening, I think, when you're new, and there's public and media there, and there you are trying to look really competent, and it's not really, you don't know that much about, I don't know, waste management in a certain geographical region, and suddenly that's the topic of discussion. Okay, and the other one was harmful errors, and the particular example I've got here is a new MP who another MP had sort of got them into a conversation about wouldn't they be better, rather than being a list MP, being an electorate MP and having a geographical area to represent. And if they did that, what would be the area to represent? So it was kind of a hypothetical conversation this guy got sucked into, and it all went wrong because the other MP then went off and said, hey, did you know Thomas wants to run for an electorate MP in your electorate? So pretty difficult. So he said it was just an informal chat with a colleague, and then suddenly quite a few other colleagues learned from this other MP that I was going to run, which he wasn't, that I might want to go to that particular electorate. But that was not good because that member of Parliament was still there thinking I'm going to go try and take over, or expecting him to resign or retire or whatever. So obviously for him, he got sucked into a conversation that then had a lot of negative ramifications for him. So okay, and so the third area of findings I want to just briefly talk about is some of these strategies that politicians would use to try and stay afloat in this difficult environment. And so these are the arrows pointing out. I'm just going to talk about the top two there, being cautious, which is a protect strategy, and positioning oneself, which is a promote strategy. So just before I read it out, so being cautious is very much like Van Maanen's idea that when you're new, if you're in this very difficult tournament competitive environment, you are going to be careful, right? You're going to be, like a lot of people quoted a former Prime Minister of New Zealand called Keith Holyoake, who I think was him, said, breathe through your nose when you're new. Like, don't open your mouth. Seriously. Imagine if you were new in a role here and someone said, the main thing is just don't say anything. Don't open your mouth. Breathe through your nose for the first year. You'd be like, really? Is it that bad? So so Daniel says, and he was really enthusiastic. He loved being an MP. He says, what I have to keep reminding myself is that there's never a moment when you can let your guard down. You have to be careful at every moment. So I've got through 2 years without going after a blaze of scandal, and that's good. Being cautious is worthwhile. So that idea, you've really got to just always. Actually, I'll just digress slightly. So he also told a nice story. He had been just in a parliamentary corridor chatting to a friend, and there was a woman just standing further down the corridor. Anyway, he told the friend a joke, and the next day the joke appeared in the papers. And he was like, oh. what if I told a really bad joke? It was fine. It wasn't like salacious or anything, but he was like, oh my gosh, yeah. The potential for a harmful error, if the little casual joke he told had been something, I mean, at least it was told accurately, I guess. Retold accurately, there's so much of that. Okay, and then positioning oneself. So this is a promote strategy. So people are trying not just beyond being safe and like protecting themselves in this difficult environment, they're still trying to get ahead. They want to get onto the select committee. They want to be a chair. They maybe want to be a minister further down the road. So Anthony says around promotion, when a minister resigns or someone like that, that leads to somebody replacing them, and that leads to a reshuffle amongst the chairman, select committees and so forth. Whether to lobby openly for a job or just be quiet and let the experience tell the story. What works and what doesn't work, there's no set rule. So this idea that it's very difficult to figure out, you know, it's not like they advertise the role and you apply, it's not at all, it's a completely hidden covert process about how to get into these next roles. And he's like, well, so trying to figure out how to do that is quite tricky. So our research questions are around the experience and then the response. So in terms of the experience of socialization challenges, we've got these 4 things here. So 4 challenges of conflicting demands, system mysteries, scrutiny, and competition. And these render the newcomers vulnerable. So we talked about reputational vulnerability. And how do they respond? Well, and this differs greatly. Like a lot of the newcomer literature is about how newcomers are proactive and they develop relationships and they trying to think of something. They seek information. That's not kind of what we found at all in this. There's like these protect strategies about being cautious, staying consistent is more like people like living your values, so people know what to expect from you, and balancing act about managing different stakeholders. And then on the promote side, adding value is like sort of proving your worth, proving your performance. Credibility is really about the debating chamber, showing you can hold your own, and positioning oneself to try and get those opportunities. So that's how we found that they respond. Some interesting ethical issues that this brings up. And I don't have the solutions. If there's an ethicist in the room, maybe they all have the solutions. But perhaps my first point is around this ejecting newcomers quickly through it being such a challenging environment. Is this unethical that that in a sort of tournament socialization context, people are going through such a harsh and rigorous process? Perhaps like a military boot camp, like if they don't survive, maybe that's a good thing, right? Maybe they wouldn't have made it anyway. Let's get rid of them quickly. It's better for the organization to not, well, it's better for society, I guess, in terms of politicians, if they're not going to be useful and helpful and make it, that they get quickly pushed along. And for that individual, let them get on with the next career. Or instead of that, are we actually wasting talent? Are people getting kicked out because they make a stupid joke in a corridor? And then actually they're a great politician. They just, on one occasion, if he had told a bad joke, or a joke that society wouldn't have liked in some way, you know, are we wasting, is it possibly sort of wasting talent? Although it's a bit more practical. But it's still ethical issues about whether or not this is a good thing to do, both for the organization and for the individual, the newcomers. And then another thing I think is quite interesting is around performance. Is this helpful for performance? Is that a good thing? And is it good for performance at different levels? Like maybe you could say the tournament socialization is really good for the unit, but bad for the individual, or I don't know, bad for the organization, good for the individual. I don't know, but I think there are interesting differences potentially there. And then maybe a tournament environment increases unethical behaviour. So if you think about that poor MP who got sucked into their conversation about would he be better as an electorate MP, you know, because it's a harsh environment and people are trying to weed people out, does that mean that colleagues, total misuse of the word colleagues, engage in more unethical behaviour to try and say, are you worth investing in? Or if are you very easily manipulated and, kicked out? So maybe that kind of unethical behaviour is encouraged by the tournament. Then some possible practical implications for organisations. Is this good? Does it shape newcomers? Does it help them to behave in appropriate ways? Is that a good thing? Or is it wasting talent? So how does that work out practically? Also, for elite newcomers, perhaps this idea of reputation and reputational vulnerability is a really useful thing to make people think about explicitly. And one of the interesting things in the tournament literature is that in complex settings where performance is difficult to evaluate, it is often the relative evaluations or relative performance that people judge, not absolute performance. So this idea that even just being a little bit better than somebody else can give you a big advantage. So then if you helped, especially senior or elite newcomers, to think more about reputation and reputational vulnerability, perhaps they think about that anyway, but perhaps it would be useful. If they don't, perhaps that would be a useful concept to introduce to people. And then perhaps this idea of reputational vulnerability is more of an issue for elite newcomers, whether in complex, high visibility roles, where mistakes can be fatal, like if they say something that society or some section of society doesn't like, the media will get hold of it and they'll be pressured to leave. So should organizations try and protect these elite newcomers who may be more subject to these difficult pressures? And then finally, around the 6 reputational strategies, it might be strategies be useful in like coaching conversations to help elite newcomers or senior newcomers to think about what they should do in a new environment. Like being cautious seems quite radical. But maybe that's actually just really sensible when you're at senior level, that you have to really always hold back before you say anything. I mean, Joe would probably have a view on that. Yeah, so I think that might be useful as a framework, perhaps. Yeah, that is the model. All right, that's it. So if anyone's got any questions.